We begin in a tan void of rectangular stacks, seemingly blocks of paneled sand for feet to sink into. And the soundscape is vacuous like the empty space we stare upon. And the single button top piece is the only one we can grab, so we do so because we must, and now with a mouse tap it spins, and with a mouse hold it locks into the only other knob available, and in this moment we have been taught to follow direction and to mistake that following for freedom. With the next piece comes the next non-choice, but we can spin it, and we can envision what arises soon after. And maybe we imagine more than the lulling brown of sound and empty void, and our tendons anticipate the additional knobs yet to come. And upon locking into the knob, another arrives, and we are satisfied, and having predicted the predictable, having garnered mastery in the span of endearing seconds. It's when the beige bridge arc appears that the unsaid is spoken and we should hear it. These pieces have an obvious place to land. We spin and hold and lock into place, but we are mechanistically doing so, not deciding, merely following the momentum of our own reasoning, sacrificing agency on the altar of convention. A bridge has to span a gap. What would be the point of such a shape otherwise? This is a game like all games. It chooses for us the paths to traverse, and we feel as if we have chosen ourselves, and that is half the fun. A guided journey, our hands held tightly so that we do not wander far from our own pride. I didn't care for Lego growing up, though like everyone I owned it. Instead, I ventured toward panorama designs mass-produced and packaged as digital cascades of splendor called video games, with Sonic the Hedgehog on my older brother's TV screen as I, and perhaps you, squeezed and jostled our secondary controllers believing we were maneuvering a blue blur through green fields of pixel stripes, or with my sister's boyfriend's bought and left behind PlayStation, displaying a steam engine bursting through space and into my screen as the FF7 logo slashed across all our pupils in 1997. With such instantly gratifying splendor, there was no point in jostling Lego chunks into place just to stare at faded matte blue, a top matte red, a top matte yellow, attempting to manifest faint figments. Seeing our own personally constructed worlds lack significance in place of the techno-adventure and science dreaming of Japanese developers far, far away. My dad used to say, video games are worse as stories than written fiction because they choose what we see and thus isolate the mind from other possible structures. Writing suggests through language what our imagination fills. Lego is near to literature in that way. It barely entangles itself with the image it's meant to portray. The joy comes in filling the gaps with one's own mind. I didn't care for that as a kid. I wanted to peek into others' minds, not to render a weaker version of my own. And so video games were enough for me to leave the books and Lego mostly aside. But Lego Builder's journey tracks the happy median between both extremes. We can fiddle with and orient Lego pieces into sloppily familiar structures, and in so doing grant ourselves a sense of guidance in the formation of those structures, all for the sake of a single trajectory. No matter the cascade of possible inputs for any one diorama space, the game will not progress unless we stack the pieces along a narrow field of preference. This limitation is explicit. Our Lego figurine's potential father figure alternates with our own selections, his own artificial choices. We plant a piece where we want to plant it, he follows suit. But he is himself a limited set of instructions based on player input. He will only follow up with his own pieces if we place ours in their proper places. And so what feels very much like creative freedom is very much creative constraint. If we listen carefully, we can hear the subtle tug of unconscious partiality towards symmetry and simplicity, finalized and closed-off angles, and avoidance of visual dissonance. Hence, we find ourselves in a state of collaboration. The fact that the AI is so readily set to follow our actions, and that those actions will only be followed because what we must do is so boldly comprehensible, does not make it feel any less like we built something that we could have chosen otherwise. Video games entice through freedom, and so does Lego, and so does life. and yet all filter freedom via constraints. All function out of a forward momentum born of those constraints. We vie to construct something viable. We feel in our toes the need to not fail. Our instinctive effectance motive won't allow us to not pin the pieces into their proper places. When the AI of Lego is already set to build off of our creations, based on the obvious constructions most players will create, it becomes palpable the limits of our own creativity. We are not as free as we believe, but that's the joy in the illusion. These limits are the limits of all collaboration. And in games, we are not merely collaborating with AI instructions manifested on screen, but with developers whose stakes in their own vision we now fiddle with gently to the edge of whatever sandbox is safe for us to dabble. There's a story being told here, slowly, tepidly, and freedom must be sacrificed in the telling, and we must do so willingly. A collaboration between ourselves and developers whose effects are long past setting in motion. We, much like the child our figurine represents, must learn to listen to the landscape and our places within it. The noise of color soon takes its place, and we must learn to see through the noise. Prior to now, the only significant hue has been a dry amber yellow, stacks of flooring matching the cylindrical curve of our figurine head, and each line of said amber has served as guide for our hopping fellow traveler selves to slide or leap along yellow brick roads to each new square horizon of rainbow playground. Soon enough, we get to dictate colors through a machine at the center of the screen. Each layer of Lego item at the center becomes a match of whatever color rotates beneath it. And then our five-fold stack sucks away, only to deconstruct and reconstruct the landscape around us until it joins a train of piles along the backdrop. This process goes and goes, and the stacks pile periodically, and we may stare dumbfounded without chance at progress, searching for a color combination, deciphering frames and sounds and lights for hints to trigger the next fade to the next screen. A cascade of scrunch-mouthed minutes, wrinkled, elongated eye blinks, and grumbles at halted breakthroughs punctuates our meager mouse clicks until confusion cleaves out curiosity into frustration. The mistake is in the noise, in the over-attentiveness to stimuli. Again, we are taught to listen. In so doing, we are taught what to ignore. Color is in the world because it is of the world. The mechanisms of color switching change are part of a broad construction that forms the very setting we inhabit, that of machines assembling the very pieces we utilize, and that of the workers setting templates for the machines to follow. Floating above the child figurine whose backpack freedom we follow is a father toiling at rote heartache-numb work, designating and reconfiguring a conveyor line of shapes and colors for replication, and the child we play has stumbled on one such machine awaiting prime instruction, a background object to be ignored, yet a hint at the hollow hill we all must cross, that of work and instructions, and colors fading from our cheeks as we become machines ourselves, our own sense of self in place, additional cogs along an outpouring of production that both forms and defines our world, and perhaps what more we can imagine beyond it. We are that child for so long, grasping toys made by sweaty hands at a distance, jostling thumbsticks through worlds elaborated by committee. So much splendor is formed by so much work, and all that play will become a skill set to be managed or sold, a kind of self-exploitation. Here, take the time I have left. I worked hard so you can use me like all the gadgets I used so affectionately as a child, and we'll work together to orient the world to look like right angles of geometric unity for coherence sake, for comfort, for lack of noise. The little Lego figurine doesn't know his father is always working to make the same pieces he later plays with, that one's arduous work becomes another's fickle pleasure, that the ultimate end of the journey is to stop playing and construct journeys for others, to live rote, untethered, benign, and to accept the occasion of such living as necessary, honest, and meaningful. I think of the child figurine huddled beside a bloom of warmth with his father, the shift into dusk overcoming the child's waking into sleepfulness, and the father waiting alone, elongating a sleepless night, as if avoiding the inevitable return to business as usual and all the hard angles of machinery in contrast to the soft round of a child's smile and the shapeless glow of a fire. When we put out that fire, the title screen appears. Whose journey are we on? And what does it mean or matter to inhabit a world of right angles and function designating knobs? What fixations arise when all rounded corners must inevitably align, when felt connection is only achieved upon solving a lineup puzzle? Does our protagonist figurine recognize the simple squares and rectangles that abound, or is it enough to see the curlicue swirls of fingerprints glistening to know in his plastic bones the splendor of question mark shaped thoughts? We are all a bit like the Lego figurine we play. We are all accustomed to the ready-made designs of modern life, doors, staircases, railings, crosswalks, each a quaint and kind guide of where we can or cannot go and what we can or cannot do. Design halts choice by making the horizons we chance to see merely a series of choice blockades, but then we find ourselves freely choosing, or at least feeling as such. And so too does the Lego figurine decide to define his space of movement within the familiar railing of lemon yellow. So to see color and to change it is to see a striking shift, a shift of pure preference, one which we can't follow without ceasing progress, an act of navel-gazing wonder, of daydreaming luster, of non-productive aside in a world of productivity-defining identity. And thus, a quiet sitting in a square of grown comfort is an act of wasteful meandering, but also the core of expression for us and for our Lego figurine selves. We should not waste this time lightly. The color distracts so readily because we presume purpose out of what we're allowed to control. If something draws attention, it must be worthy of that attention. Our focus is now tethered to that one frame, the obvious pursuit outside of that frame now invisible. We can try and fail and cling to hope that the next effort will be enough. But maybe effort is not what's needed, but rather sight of what's out of frame. Progress emerges when we finally return to our limits, to the tug of prior steps. No more fiddling. No more jostling oblong pieces into unorthodox configurations. Fall back to what's known, the same shapes we had used before. All others were mere florid dressing. Is there irony in the fact that our Lego figurine progresses toward the same end as his own father, toward the cavernous dark of brightly lit devices, corkscrewing knobs, and elongated levers? Ironic because the more this child figurine improves his ability to manipulate the world, the more capable he becomes of being manipulated into working a menial job like his own father seemingly does. There's a lesson in this, though it's an uncomfortable one. We can't cull the sounds of daily life into coherence without sacrifice, and progress itself is further sacrifice still. So we live our lives diminishing our attention to the point of pinhole focus. We become like product, molded and enacted for the sake of others' ends. The distractions we once toyed with becoming like the bounce melody of speech, drowning out the percussive low of our footsteps. Ever forward, we march. Think of all that we don't notice, having trained ourselves not to. Consider how limited our perception in our efforts to be perceived as useful and worthy to work and less to play. I think back to my own father. The fact that he won't read all the books he could have in a lifetime. Yet he taught me to love to read, while I continued to also love to play. And I played a lot, countless hours, and my dad never stopped working for me to have the time to imagine worlds and to find comfort in the worlds of others. The unfairness of this is further punctuated by my having the time to waste in a game about Lego, and to see in that game the same visage of myself and my father on plastic figurines, and to count both as significant, to have the time to write up these thoughts in hopeful connection with others. Is it a waste to have done so? Or is it merely unfair? It is through space, avoidance, boredom, that the free play of central self arises. We cannot find ourselves if we are not looking. Our self, if that means anything, emerges through action and then retrospectively through the story revealed by that action. We need diversion. We need to escape the grinding tug toward the tunnel vision that awaits. The puzzle for purpose is to see what is right there, always, but now significant, unlike the seemingly benign of day-to-day, joyous distractions. Perhaps we should long for a chance to be so wastefully distracted. This is To Games It May Concern. Like the video to promote it for others, subscribe if you'd like to see more, share if you want to gather interest, and leave a comment to spark a conversation. Thanks for watching.